Hello, I'm Dr. John Cruz, and today I'm going to be talking about either why I hate hate crimes or why you should be disgusted by hate crimes. Um, I'll try to stick with more of the neuroscience and the psychology and hopefully less with the politics, but I think this is an issue where neuroscience and psychology are intimately tied in with the politics and legal ruling. The take-home message is that what we call hate crimes, I think we're using a poor term that really doesn't convey what's going on. Hate crimes are really about dehumanization, and the underlying emotion, I would contend, is disgust, and it may be more helpful in conveying what this means if we really refer to them as dehumanization crimes or even as disgust crimes. And I'm going to start in a very roundabout way by talking about the COVID epidemic and how that's made us, many of us, more aware of the sense of smell and taste. Most of us take it for granted and are particularly only focused on smell or taste when we're having a good meal or something out of the ordinary registers a smoky sky from wildfires or some noxious smell emitted from somewhere. But most of the time, smell in humans is in the background, and we like to think we're not that strongly affected at it, particularly compared to animals like cats or dogs that seem to detect and make sense of a lot of their world through the sense of smell. But again, COVID, given that some studies suggest 40 to 50% of people lost their sense of smell during COVID or as a result of infection with COVID, and some health officials actually promoted that loss of sense of smell was a more sensitive and more useful indicator of infection than actually a high fever was. So when we were scanning everyone with temperature guides, I mean, we know that half the people who had COVID were asymptomatic, so we were missing lots of people anyway. But lots of illnesses, infectious illnesses, can cause fevers, and although other infections can cause loss of smell, it's usually a very rare occurrence with others, and it was a particularly common one with COVID. And furthermore, just last week there was a study documenting changes in the olfactory cortex, so the part of the cortex involved with smell as a result of COVID infection, either not just severe COVID, but mild COVID, and correlations not only with atrophy of the olfactory cortex, but atrophy of the whole brain to a greater extent than people who were not infected. The study couldn't tell us anything about vaccine status, but clearly both mildly symptomatic and severely symptomatic people were, both groups showed extensive excessive for age degeneration, and not just physical studies on brain imaging, but also did more poorly on cognitive tests, suggesting that this was a real and meaningful change. So smell, olfactory cortex, that sense has been highlighted recently, and the basic emotion that's most tied to smell and taste is disgust. And disgust, which is characterized by a crinkling of the nose, a thrusting of the tongue. Both of those physical facial expressions are associated with, measurably, research have shown it's good for keeping noxious smells and contaminated substances out of your nose. It's not a perfect. And the thrust is either preliminary for vomiting or bringing it up from deeper inside of you, or just getting it out of your mouth. So the basic emotion of disgust is about what's contaminated, what's poisonous, what's deadly, what do I have to keep away from, and what do I have to continue avoiding from it. And what I consider a brilliant book by the psychologist Susan Miller called Disgust, the Gatekeeper Emotion, she makes what I think is a strong and compelling case that even if evolutionary this emotion was relegated to keeping poisons or contaminants out of our system, So again, the things that trigger disgust are things that are smelly or greasy or rotting, slimy, often connected with bodily excretions and bodily productions, and including rotting and death, and feces, urine, sexual emanations from the body, sweating. So not only are these connected with physical contaminants or things that could make us physically sick, but that this has been extended sort of in a metaphorical way, that we treat with disgust people, groups, individuals who we consider contaminants, who we consider separate from us, foreign bodies that really aren't part of our tribe, part of our community, part of our world. So I would say it's the dehumanizing emotion. Now I'll sidetrack a little, and there is a little bit of research looking at what's called behavioral immunity, in that when groups of people used to be more separated and had less interaction in a global, interconnected world, other groups really may be carriers of infectious diseases, of other contaminants to them, and staying away, keeping them apart, keeping them different was an effective means of avoiding contamination. Again, contamination being the core aspect of disgust. Now, I am going to, and I have been to some extent, blurring disgust and contempt. There are certainly some emotion researchers who feel strongly that contempt is a separable and distinct emotion from disgust. Part of their arguments for its distinctiveness is, one, they report that the facial expressions of contempt are unilateral, so they're sort of a half thrusting your tongue, half closing your nostrils, sometimes raising an eyebrow, and they also claim that contempt is only directed at other humans, and it's about superiority, and not just those superiority, because we think it's that the other people are unredeemable and that you are perpetually better than the other. And again, I would say that ties in pretty closely with the core of disgust, that this is an alien, this is different, that we've actually dehumanized. And their claim that contempt only is conveyed towards other humans, I don't think that's actually a true situation. I mean, when humans tend to be contemptuous of animals, I mean, if we're comparing a chimpanzee to a human, we're contemptuous that the chimpanzee isn't able to do complex arithmetic or why we treat them as animals or put them in jails or zoos, whatever you want to call them, is because of, and we do, is contempt for other species, not just for other humans. So in terms of the importance of contempt or disgust, as I would, again, I am blurring the two. Irving Gottman, who's one of the most proficient and extensively followed chroniclers of human relations, marital relationships, couples relationships, he defines or identifies contempt, disgust. What I'm saying is really disgust is the biggest signaler that a marriage is headed toward divorce or an end. So so most people are surprised at that. They think people angry, screaming at each other, that's a good predictor for separation or divorce. But actually, lots of couples, particularly different cultures or different family backgrounds, can be angry and be angry intensively, but can find ways to reconcile from anger. But again, with disgust, contempt, it's not just that you are in disagreement with the other person, it's that you are viewing the other person as inferior, as subhuman, as not redeemable, as unworthy of being included with you. So it's not surprising that that's a good predictor for divorce. There's been other research, again, looking more at specifically disgust and showing if you put people in a disgusting, a bad smelling environment with rotting food nearby, They are more likely to make moral judgments of others when viewing the same situation, that someone else's behavior isn't just wrong or inappropriate or illegal, it's morally wrong. So again, that highlights that disgust is employed, or when disgust is employed, we're more likely to be morally rejecting extremist, less objective, less able to reconcile with our enemies. So getting over to the hate crime, which is part of when I was talking about this, we use the word hate crime, and critics beat up on the term all the time because they say, oh, this abused woman shot her husband because she was extremely scared and angry of him. She hated him. Why isn't that a hate crime? Or they take any strong emotion to be indicative of hate, and they're correct in that sense, and that's why I think hate is a horrible term for hate crime. So in our culture, in English language, we use hate for almost any strong negative emotion. So if I told you if I hate roller coasters, if I hate watching video clips of people dying in Ukraine, if I hate politicians who say, oh, let's more guns and more, I can't even remember the phrase, prayers and good wishes for the people who've been dead from gun violence, or I hate that, or I may hate lima beans, or I may hate having to talk here in front of an audience and mess my words up or reveal thoughts or feelings I am not ready to share in public. So we use hate for all those terms, but hate there is identifying very separate, different basic emotions. So when I talked about hatred of politicians, or hating politicians who are dismissing any real attempt to address gun violence, that is anger. And again, that's because I view it as unfair and that I can't do much about it. When I am angry about watching dead Ukrainians on video screens, it's, for me anyway, it's sadness comes up. That the loss of human life is something that I hate. When I talked about hating talking here, that's about shame, and shame is about feeling that I'm not living up to my standards and fear because of that. When I talked about, I'm not even sure which example I used for talking about fear, so we talk about scary things that scare us and hating those situations. Again, it's usually fear we are talking about. And the lima beans, when I think I mentioned that I hate the taste of lima beans, that's actually the one place where we're talking about disgust, and that again is the best of all those examples. That's the one closest to meaning of what's going on, I'd say, at the core of hate crimes. So again, hate crimes in our culture and many other countries, there's a specific designation for hate crimes when the perpetrator is targeting certain individuals because of their membership in a group, and it's usually a group that does have lower status in that society. It's often a group that has been particularly historically reviled or stereotyped, and interestingly, again, with stereotypes, whether it's hating the Jews or hating women or hating gays, it's interesting how often when we talk about hating them, that the stereotypers bring up sort of or hating Democrats because they're all pedophiles. Again, one, these stereotypes aren't true, but two, so much of the focus is on behaviors that involve things that are disgusting, things we think are tied to repulsive, contaminating behaviors on those individuals. And again, it's not just that they're bad or wrong. We have to make that's proof that these people are inferior and a risk of contaminating us with their disgusting behaviors. So again, I think it would be more helpful in distinguishing why we single out these specific set of crimes as hate crimes to either use the term disgust crimes or dehumanization crimes, because that gets more clearly and simply at why we are designating them for more worthy of punishment. And again, part of why I think that that's appropriate is that these are not crimes in the passion of the moment. And again, not that emotions can excuse behavior, but they can explain a lot of it. But these are usually, again, mindsets and approaches that are used to marginalize, to dehumanize, to dismiss other fellow human beings and to essentially say that they are worthy of being killed because of their membership in these groups. That's a dangerous thing, I think, for any society to be engaged in. I mean, it's interesting, it's the same thing we do engage in to make it easier to go to war when we are attacking the Russians or, in the past, the Japanese, the Germans, the Jews, or anything. Again, we often focus on why they are morally inferior to us, why they are subhuman in their behavior, often, again, to lower our own threshold for engaging in subhuman behavior. So one of my titles for this talk is "You Should Be Disgusted by Hate Crimes." I really don't think we should be disgusted with them, because that's falling into the same trap of calling these people deplorables, saying that their behavior makes them subhuman, makes them irredeemable, makes them so bad and contaminating we have to keep them away and quarantine them or segregate them. So my article title is purposely provocative and not true. So I don't think we should be really disgusted by hate crimes, but I think we should be treating hate crimes as a different category, because they are a more divisive, destructive element to have in our society. And if you don't think that we attach motivations and judgments and to our penal code, I mean, some people think that our punishment system is purely based on behavior, and clearly it's not. If you run over your car because a little kid, so you're driving a car and the kid dashes into the road and you run over them, or you are furiously mad at your ex and you chase them in your car in the parking lot and run them over, or you see a group of gay right protesters and you step on the accelerator to run into them, or those are all different crimes. They're all treated differently, and we treat them differently. We either consider them an accident, or we consider them manslaughter, or we consider them intentional murder, or we consider them first-degree murder with the hate crime exacerbating circumstance situation, because those really are different crimes. We do take motivations into account, or an attempt to assess motivations when we are evaluating how serious or bad a crime is. So that's, I think, so 1 or 2 minutes on, so how do we get out of viewing someone with contempt or disgust? So again, given that disgust it has its origins in food or other things that are disgusting, we actually have well-developed techniques. How do you get a kid to eat their peas? You hopefully don't, what we know is if you reintroduce the food over and over again in a non-contentious environment where you at least have a chance to focus on maybe potential positive attributes of what's being consumed, then that person can eventually displace their disgust for that food. Not always, but most people can. I mean, interestingly, most alcohol, coffee, many of the products adults in our society enjoy are intrinsically repellent or disgusting. I mean, it's hard to get rats in a laboratory situation. It's hard to get kids, kid might sample your, pick up your beer by mistake, and their face is a disgust face. An interesting side effect, going back to, not side effect, side comment, one of the points Susan Miller makes in her gatekeeper of emotion thing is that we often use that disgust face when we're not even consciously using it to teach our children what's disgusting. When they're teaching about toilet training and why this should go in the toilet or why they should do this where, but also, in groups that are demonizing or treating others that way, we use the same facial expressions to teach them that these people, this group, this tribe is disgusting to us. So repeated exposure with emphasis on what's maybe positive helps us reverse the situation from disgust, which is putting it out of our body, to embracing or enveloping. And similarly, so we've seen with what's allowed greater acceptance of homosexuality into our society is, rather than not viewing it or viewing it only extremely rarely in our movies, films, culture of in decades ago, the only exposure people had, unless they had friends who were willing to reveal it, was pejorative views in the cinema and books and in movies. And it's been through constant exposure of positive examples, or that societal resistance to disgust towards gay people has markedly decreased, and that should be manageable with other groups as well. So if there's any questions, I'm happy to answer them. I'm not seeing any right now. This will be posted on YouTube, and next week's talk is meth versus Adderall. What's really the difference? That's all.